Okay, so I'm going to do something which I haven't done for a while, and that is a continuation of my Prime Minister videos, just for something a little bit different rather than opinions and reflections on contemporary issues. This is just a historical insight. So if you haven't seen the previous videos, feel free to check out my channel. You may need to go back a bit, as you know I upload a lot of videos, and the last person I left off with was Lord Chatham, better known as William Pitt the Elder, who was our 9th Prime Minister. So that then leads me on to Prime Minister number 10, Frederick North, Lord North. Now, Lord North was one of our longest serving Prime Ministers, but today he isn't that well remembered, which is surprising really, because his term in office was quite an eventful one. Lord North was born on the 13th of April 1732 in Piccadilly, which is in London. And as with the others, I'm just going to read some basic points here rather than going really analytically through absolutely everything. This is a popular quote attributed to Lord North. Men may be popular without being ambitious, but there is hardly an ambitious man who does not try to be popular. And this is the info directly from the Downing Street page. Best known as the man who lost Britain's American colonies, Lord North served for a disastrous 12 years as Prime Minister. A hard-working and sound administrator, Lord North had served in the governments of the Duke of Newcastle and Lord Chatham, rising to the position of Chancellor of the Exchequer. He was fiercely loyal to King George III, who liked his moderate policies and used him to lead the party of royal allies he had nurtured in the Commons. Against Lord North's own inclinations, the King persuaded him to form a government in 1770. His time as Prime Minister was dominated by ongoing problems in the American colonies, now reaching boiling point. He appreciated that the real issue at stake was not just taxation but power, and led Britain into the War of Independence, with the full approval of King George III. The war turned out to be a disaster. Lord North made tactical errors that led to heavy British losses, including the defeats at Saratoga in 1777 and Yorktown in 1781. He pleaded with George III to allow him to resign, but he was not allowed this escape route until the war was over, allowing the blame to rest firmly with him. Things went from bad to worse at home as abroad. In 1780, anti-Catholic unrest known as the Gordon Riots broke out in London, with rioters agitating for the repeal of the Catholic Relief Act. Lord North watched the riots from his home at 10 Downing Street. In 1782, resigned after a vote of no confidence. So some key information. North was in power from 1770 to 1782, some 12 years. That puts him in either 5th or 6th position as the longest serving Prime Minister. He was a Tory. Some important events during his tenure in office included the Falklands crisis. Now, the Downing Street website is a little bit harsh on North. They said his era was a complete disaster. He was certainly one of our least successful prime ministers because of the American crisis. However, early in his tenure was the Falklands crisis. That was an attempt by the Spanish to seize the Falklands Islands, which had a small British garrison. Of course, the Falklands is still an issue of contention with present-day Argentina, which, by the way, did not exist at that point. But anyway, that actually proved to be a British success. We regained the Falklands, and the North administration was briefly very popular after that. And it was seen in positive contrast to the Corsican crisis of 2 years earlier, which had overshadowed the Grafton administration. So, to say that Lord North's tenure was a complete disaster is slightly unfair, because that was an early achievement. Nevertheless, North was mercilessly a target of caricatures of the time, notably James Gillray, and French caricaturists as well. I would be interested to know if he is known well in the United States. Certainly he's not that well remembered in Britain. I know King George III is well known in America. They simply known as King George. So to my American viewers, are you familiar with Lord North? Because he was a pivotal figure, your opponent, of course, in the War of Independence. So are you familiar with this name? He was given the courtesy title the 2nd Earl of Guildford, I believe after his premiership. And of course, in this era, the politics was quite different from today. So he was actually part of another coalition, which was with Charles Fox. who is also a very well remembered figure. A bit more about the Gordon riots. They weren't only serious anti-Catholic riots by General Gordon, but they were actually the worst unrest seen in London for a very long time. Not comparable to the French Revolution, but still serious enough, and they were deadly riots. By some accounts, as many as 800 people were killed, so these were deadly riots. And in fact, if you look at YouTube, there is several videos about the Gordon riots, so they were a major upheaval of the time. Another major event, of course, was the act of the Tea Act of 1773, which led to the Boston Tea Party and ultimately to the American Revolution in 1776. So in Britain, North is remembered as basically the Prime Minister who lost America, and in America I guess he would be seen as a tyrant in the same light as King George III. I find it hard to believe that all 12 years of Lord North's tenure would have been a complete disaster. Certainly he does deserve some of the criticism that goes his way, because the buck stops with the Prime Minister, but I think perhaps it's a little bit unfair to dismiss it as entirely a disaster. Nevertheless, he's always going to go down as one of our worst Prime Ministers, and that's it's not easy to say that of any man. You want to be objective, but the consequences of losing America were profound. So that's Lord North. He died at the age of 60 in Mayfair in 1792. Just looking at some other interesting information that could be seen as significant. There's an interesting picture on Wikipedia which shows a silver medallion commemorating the motion of no confidence against Lord North. Just looking at some other information. In fact, he joined the Fox North Coalition in 1783, just after his tenure. A preserved 18th century door on display at Edinburgh Castle shows a hangman's scaffold labelled Lord Nord, carved by a prisoner captured during the American War of Independence. His wife was Enspec. This painting of her by Joshua Reynolds. So really that's some of the information about Lord North. So he's one of our longest serving Prime Ministers, but also one of the most controversial and generally seen as one of the worst. It's hard to argue against that. However, I would contend that the Falklands crisis he handled that well, and he should get some credit for that. So that is our 10th Prime Minister, Lord North.